this is Elizabeth Van Nostren, professional internet hobo. I'm here today with Lincoln Quirk.
Hi, I'm Lincoln Quirk. I'm also apparently a hobo right now. I just left my company and I'm figuring out what to do next.
And Timothy is unfortunately traveling today, so it's just me and Lincoln. So the reason I'm having you on today is that before we were both hobos, I worked for you at a company called Wave and or Sendwave.
That's right. Yeah. I and my co-founder started Sendwave in 2014. And I've been doing this for 11 years now. I just left both companies this year.
Before we go further, I should note that I still have a vested financial interest in Wave because I had stock from when I was there, and I assume you do as well.
Yep, I do. Yep, okay. I left recently, but I still hold founder level shares in Wave.
Okay. Can you tell us what the companies do?
Yes. Sendwave was started in 2014 and is a remittance company. So it allows people who have family in Africa to send money home back to their family. So people living in the US or the UK, a few other countries in Europe as well. This company was started in 2014 and became successful very quickly. So by 2015, it was one of the leading remittance providers in the US to Kenya. Basically, the story of Wave, which was essentially a spin-off of Sendwave, was that we realized that the technique we were using to send money for the recipients to receive the money, called mobile money, was not scaling on its own.
If I could fill in some details here. So
Please.
My understanding is Kenya had amazing mobile money. Its mobile money infrastructure was better than the American infrastructure. So it was easy to have someone send money from their bank account in the U.S. to you, who would send it to the Kenyan mobile money system.
That's right.
But other countries, and the Kenyan system is called M-Pesa. And I joined Wave because I had read some about M-Pesa and saw it had done amazing things in pulling people out of poverty.
That's right. Yes, M-Pesa. There's a study in economics, I think in 2017, showing that M-Pesa had increased the GDP of Kenya by several percentage points, which is just ridiculously impressive. As a financial technology, it's embedded in pretty much every sector in Kenya at this point, and it's just like every day people are using this product many times per day.
Right, but no other country had that same total adoption.
Yeah. So the company who made M-Pesa was called Safaricom in Kenya. But Safaricom is a subsidiary of Vodafone, which is the multinational telephone company that many of you may have heard of. And Vodafone tried to scale M-Pesa to nearby countries, Uganda, Tanzania, and it was medium successful. I think it's over the last 10 years, it's become more and more successful, but there are lots of competitive effects. I think Safaricom had basically a monopoly in Kenya, whereas that's not the case in mobile money in the neighboring countries. So it's a lot more competitive. It makes less money, and as a result, the infrastructure doesn't work as well. This is one of these cases where monopolies can often be good for the end user.
So you have Sendwave. It's doing remittances from a couple countries to a couple countries.
That's right.
And because the mobile money isn't working in enough countries, you decide to implement it yourself?
Yep. So this was around 2016 that we really started working on this, and it was very much just like a small thing within Sendwave, where we were like, okay, well, if we could make mobile money work in another country, then we could scale Sendwave to send to that country. So it's really about scaling Sendwave at the start. And we started in Ethiopia, another nearby country to Kenya, partly just we thought that there were good potential network neighboring effects, and partly because we saw that Ethiopia had no mobile money whatsoever, and it was essentially a greenfield market. And for reasons I won't get too deep into, but Ethiopia's not ultra friendly to financial services, especially foreign investment in financial services, and so we struggled for a while getting approval. And eventually had to give up on Ethiopia. But at that point, we knew we had a product that could work, and so we started in Senegal. And in Senegal, the mobile money system that we created called Wave became quite successful, and we've scaled that to a few other countries as well, and mostly in West Africa.
Oh, so there's mobile money in more countries than just Senegal now?
Yep. So we do mobile money in Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, where we're a very large chunk of the market. I think in Senegal we're very much the top mobile money provider. There are others. In Cote d'Ivoire, we I think, last I heard we were more than half. but
more than half of mobile money.
Mobile money, yeah, that's right.
And what percentage of the economy is mobile money?
It's big. I don't happen to know, but like a lot of the money is like I think like in Senegal we were moving half the GDP, but I don't remember for Cote d'Ivoire.
Holy shit. Half the economy is amazing.
Yeah, well, so it's a little I think remittances don't actually count for GDP from an economic perspective, so it's more a comparative figure than a percentage of a pie.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, GDP is sales of goods and services, and so when you send money to support your family, that's not a sale, so it doesn't really count for GDP.
When you say remittances, do you mean from international remittances or local remittances?
That was very confusing. Great question. So in this case, I meant all domestic and international remittances. So when I say remittance company for what Sendwave does, I'm referring to international remittances, people who are migrating to the US or to Europe and sending money home. But that is a very common pattern within countries as well. People from rural areas will migrate just to their cities and then send money home, and those are also called remittances and would count for volume. People would use our products in Senegal, but they would not count towards that country's GDP.
So as I understand it, M-Pesa in Kenya started with being domestic remittances, that it was by and large people from cities sending money to people in rural areas, and then became something more like a combination of PayPal and credit card, that this is how commerce got done.
Yeah. And you might mix in Fedwire or ACH system as well, because a lot of big companies also now settle through M-Pesa. And so yeah, it's just a huge part of the financial ecosystem of Kenya.
And is Wave in, let's say, Senegal a way commerce is done, or is it still mostly remittances?
We do a lot of commerce as well. So yeah, if you go to your local grocery store, if it's if it's a small grocery store, they probably accept Wave. If it's a big grocery store, 100% they accept Wave. If it's a random person on a street corner, they may or may not, but probably they do, because they have a mobile phone and you can at least text them the money. But they might not have the merchant account to do it in the more official way. You might just text them the money. Yeah, so very much a lot of business will go through Wave now, and that's day-to-day business as well as sending money to support your family, things like that.
Let's go back to the beginning and tell me about how you decided to do international remittances.
So my co-founder, his name's Drew Durbin, and he had started a NGO prior to us working on Sendwave together. And his NGO was in Tanzania, and as part of his travels there and his work there, he saw mobile money in person for the first time. And it was not something that was widely discussed outside of local contexts, right? The sort of broader news media hadn't really picked up on the existence of mobile money. And Tanzania had a pretty early and rudimentary version of it. Kenya's version was much better, but it still existed in Tanzania.
When was this?
Probably around 2011. Drew realized that this infrastructure that was new had a lot of potential, and he also realized that people wanted to use it and were receiving a lot of money internationally and weren't receiving it on their mobile money systems because nobody outside the country knew about it. None of these so the way that people send money before Sendwave was that they would go in person to a Western Union office or a MoneyGram office, and they bring cash and they would pay large fees and then their recipients would have to go in person to a Western Union or a MoneyGram office,
which have terrible hours and availability.
Right, exactly. And they would wait in long lines. On the sending side, the lines aren't usually as long. On the receiving side, the lines could be hours to pick up your money, and you have to go to a centralized location in major cities. Again, probably feel getting really screwed on fees. Like a lot of times, if you aren't sending huge volumes, they will charge 8 to 12%, which is just crazy. And so with SendWave, we just essentially overnight transformed it from like waiting in long lines, bringing cash, to like 3% fees, do it online and do it instantly, and your recipient gets the money on their phone. And that was just like, it grew fast. We had a really great solution to a very annoying problem.
That wasn't the first company you guys started with, though, right?
That's right. We spent a bunch of time iterating on other startup ideas before we found one that worked. Previous to SendWave, we were working on social networking applications. We worked on a dating app. We worked on some video chat apps. But yeah, none of them were even making money, let alone something that could really grow to millions of users.
Okay. And so just one day you decided to do this mobile money thing instead? Like, why not start with that?
Well, I think we probably didn't. The problem seemed hard when we first talked about it. I think it took a while for the idea to coalesce. So I think both Drew and I had talked about something in the sending money world for a couple of times before we decided to work on it, and it seemed hard. It seemed like we didn't know why no other companies had done this. And that was a big question mark for us. It was just like, is there really a market opportunity here if no one's working on anything even remotely similar? And I think like there were other online remittance companies and they weren't succeeding, right? So like it was, and we didn't know why they weren't succeeding. So there was just like, it didn't seem like a proven model at all. Like we knew there would be some kind of regulatory compliance issues that we'd never dealt with and didn't know how to get started with. And we didn't know what the demand would be. And so our first week of working on this was just to try to assess and validate demand. And so we were living in New York City at the time, but we took a trip down to DC, which is where we knew that there were a bunch of like African immigrants who probably sent money home. And we just went to a Kenyan restaurant and talked to some folks and explained our idea. And this was in 2014, early 2014. But the response from the people who were being just pitched napkin ideas was actually quite astounding. We got immediate excitement, basically. People, like the waitress we talked to first, and the waitress introduced us to her manager, who like, and they both sent money regularly, right? We just had this very sort of like encouraging early moment of like pitching an idea that other people would definitely use and found very exciting. That gave us a lot of headwind or tailwinds to try to work on this product and actually launch it. And so by mid 2014, we launched it.
Okay. What were the steps in between?
So we had to figure out how to receive the money from our customers. So we had to get a way to process debit cards or credit cards or whatever, a way to deliver money to the end user. And so that was some way to connect with M-Pesa in Kenya and credit people's accounts. We had to have the funds flow infrastructure set up, so a way to send, like basically we would collect a bunch of cash in the US and every day send a wire to Kenya where we'd be able to like credit our M-Pesa account so we could distribute it to the end users. We had to build some software, right? We had to build the app that you would use. So we built an iPhone app and an Android app. And we had to build a back end that could handle the money transfer and credit people's funds instantly and connect with M-Pesa and connect with this credit card processing system. And we had to get licensed. So this was one of the like most interesting and scary aspects of launching this, is just like if you send money without being licensed in the US, you can be like liable for like quite serious penalties. It's just like a fairly heavily regulated space. And so what we did was we decided, since licensing is in the US is done both at the federal and at the state by state level, we applied for the federal license, which is with a regulatory agency called FinCEN, and then we applied for one state license, which was Maryland. And Maryland was where we had done the scouting near DC, and was a state that had relatively easy compared to the other like states in the areas that we were interested in, a relatively easy licensing requirements, but it was still like, several months of effort and then several months of them having to evaluate your license application. And we also had to raise money because we were running out of money by the time we started working on SendWave. And
you had gone through YC.
We had gone through Y Combinator, that's right. But that was for the social networking applications. So we had to raise more money, and we had to convert it because when you go through YC, a lot of times you raise money on what's called a SAFE, which is essentially like a promise for future equity, but it counts as debt before you convert it into equity. And so it's just basically for accounting reasons and for licensing reasons, we had to actually go through the legal steps of completing an equity raise and getting that money officially on our books. So yeah, there were a whole lot of steps.
And it was just you and Drew at this point still?
That's right. We brought on a compliance consultant named Michael, who ended up working for us full time, but he was a consultant for the first few months.
And Michael is why you decided to be an all-remote company, correct?
That's right, yes. So Michael was a very seasoned compliance expert. So he had worked at Western Union, he'd worked at Citibank, doing exactly this, remittances. And he lived in some town in Pennsylvania and like was very happy with his life. And we were in New York City and traveling around to DC a lot. So we were able to like be close to him and visit him, but like we weren't going to be like working in person with him. And so it was just this very early relationship with this person who was very core to what we were doing that made us decide to invest in figuring out how to build a business that could work like pretty much exclusively via Zoom and Slack.
How did that go? Like, what other decisions did you have to make?
Yeah.
Looking back, what do you wish you'd done? Although this was one of the very appealing things about Wave when I worked there was remote work was not popular at the time. I was doing miserably in open offices, and I was so excited to work from home.
I'm really, really proud of the culture we built. I think like this is one of the ways that I think we innovated as a company early on. I'm very like you. I like working at home. I don't like working in offices. I pushed hard for like figuring out how to build a company that could work remotely. And it was a nice hybrid for me because I was living with Drew at the time that we started this company together. So we were able to talk and strategize together for long hours. But then like when I was working, I didn't have an office. Even as we grew, I just worked from home and coordinated with people over Slack. And I think like, yeah, we set up our culture so that everything was online, everything was written down rather than being face-to-face and sort of meeting-based. It was very much asynchronous. I think both Drew and I had been in online communities enough to know that if you just let people type back and forth, they can get really sucked in. So like back and forth online discussions, which don't resolve nearly as quickly as face-to-face discussions. So we basically had this rule where like if you're going back and forth more than like twice with someone, you would call them. And so we tried to set up a system where it was super easy to call people and to escalate from a chat to a conversation. We put a lot of other thought into like what we should write down. And we had a set of values that we iterated on over the years that like I think were pretty helpful in making sure that people communicated effectively.
Can you get into some of the principles for what gets written down? Because this was, I think, one of the key things for making Wave work was it had a really good wiki. Like when I worked at Google, there was no point in looking for anything written down. You just find out who created it and hope they have time to explain it to you. With Wave, you could actually look stuff up. But it's really easy to get swamped with just a ton of documentation and you can't find what you actually need. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, it's funny you asked because like I think you probably came at a time when we were best at that. I think like before we had onboarded a few engineers. You were early.
I was number 4 or 5.
That's right. Yeah. So by that point, we had realized that like it was hard to onboard people just explaining stuff. We really needed to be writing stuff down. We didn't want to explain the same stuff over and over again. And so we had started to write down the things we were explaining the most often. But we hadn't sort of like had, many years of backlogged documents that we had created that like were starting to get old and stale that like no one knows how to clean up. So you came on at the perfect time. I guess like number one is just like noticing when you're explaining stuff to people and trying to make it so you don't have to do the same thing over and over again. And as you're onboarding people, I think this is fairly natural because like you just like get annoyed explaining the same things over and over again. And then 2, having a culture where like people actually look for documents, and if they don't exist, they complain, right? Rather than just asking questions and then not solving the problem. We had this sort of like thing where like if you asked a question and there was no answer to it that you could find, you say where you looked, right? And that like was a good helpful thing for like the people who like me who like realized that like, oh, I did in fact write this down, it just wasn't in a place that you looked, and so I can A, point you to what I've written down, and B, update the like whatever process causes people to like discover where to look for things, so that like there's a clear centralized place to look and it has links to the things that matter, and then like there's a forcing function as people are onboarding and getting confused to like keep those things up to date.
You guys did try in person or more in person for a while, right?
We did retreats.
Okay, so let's talk about retreats.
So our company was basically never in person. Like we were always from the very beginning, like fully remote. But we knew that there was a very useful thing that happened in person, which was just like a sort of team building, relationship building, like learning to trust people that we weren't going to get or wouldn't happen very quickly, at least if we were fully online. I think we had our first very informal retreat in, I think, July of 2014 when we had, like hired Michael full-time and we had another person full-time. And that was just like, we had some people over to our house in New York and like went out to dinner, and it was really nice. And so we were like, okay, like by the early 2015, we missed out on that for a bunch of new people. And so we I think in January had our first, what we called team retreat, where we had, maybe 6 or 7 people come to Austin, Texas at that time. And we just kind of picked fun places, and we were like, okay, like let's do this every few months. I think we did it on a 2-month cadence at the start. So every 2 months we'd rent out some place. At the start it was just little Airbnbs, but as we grew it had to be bigger and bigger hotels. And people we'd get our team together in one place. We'd like do dinners, and it would be about a week. I think we tried to make it so that people didn't have to use up their weekends. So it's really like Monday through Friday, with maybe a little travel on the ends. But the idea was it was just like a few concentrated days of co-working and meetings and like strategizing. And that I think worked really well when we were small. And as we grew big, the retreats became very impractical because we had to rent out giant hotels, and it became ridiculously expensive. But at the start it was awesome.
Did you keep doing that? Did you eventually stop?
Yeah, no, we changed. We changed it many times, and I think we went through periods of no retreats. We went through periods of like once a year. By 2024, we were not doing retreats at all. Instead, we were doing a mix of what we called immersion trips, which were for new people to the company. They would get an opportunity to. This is again for sub-Saharan Africa. So they would come to Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire, one of our early market or one of our big markets, and go get to see the product in action, talk to people who run it, talk to the agents and talk to some users, and generally get much deeper understanding of what we're actually doing. And we do that for new hires, and I think it was new hires plus like people who could use a refresher, maybe once every year or two. I forget exactly the immersion schedule, but something like that. And so still everyone gets a trip every year-ish, but it's really focused for new people on what is it that we're doing here. And then to meet up with your team and build that trust, there's just a budget for team co-working, and that doesn't have to be in our markets. It could be if your team is all in Europe, you could go meet up in Berlin together, but it wouldn't be for the whole company. It would be for the 6 or 8 people you work with, and that was mostly for the product and engineering teams. We didn't have to do that for our operational teams, which are most of the company, because they all are in person on-site workers. So the company is now you can't really say it's a hybrid, but I would say product and engineering is fully remote, and then but we do have much larger operational teams that work from an office.
Tell me about what the operational teams do.
So fundamentally, it's operational. Everything that we do day to day on the business. So support is a huge one. I would say probably just about half of our entire staff at Wave is in some kind of like support role.
And there's also some infrastructure around physical money, right?
Yep. So the mobile money infrastructure that we built in Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire has a very large, just like moving money around component. And this is done in so many different ways that like I can't even begin to scratch the surface of it. But like one of the ways was like essentially like either putting money, like hiring armored cars that move money around like a bank would do, or in more informal contexts, like finding someone who has a motorcycle who can get to rural areas and bring them cash. And so this is mainly for supplying agents, right? So the agents are the human ATMs that make the business work. And they are everywhere in the countries that we operate in. And that everywhere really means like sometimes you can only get there by motorcycle, you can't drive or something like that.
So I remember when I joined, I think no one had any management experience. And there were some growing pains while I was there. How did you guys grow as management capacity?
Yeah, I think we had to figure it out. As you said, neither Drew nor I had done people management before. We did end up hiring some people who had, and I think like we did a mix of just figuring out the way we wanted to manage people, and like learning what the basics were from books and podcasts. I think one of the podcasts that I learned the most from was called Manager Tools, and they just explain why why you do certain things, why you have one-on-one meetings, and what the point of them is. And I think we took a lot of those lessons to heart and really did adapt our culture as we learned how to manage people to what was working. I think this is very learnable. I think like most of the people who were the best managers didn't start out that way. They started out as good individual contributors, and we had to train them to become managers. But I think that like being a good IC gives you a lot of credibility in terms of actually managing people who are doing the job that you used to do. And that's a big part of how we wanted to run the company.
Let's say you could go back in time to 10 years, 11 years ago. What do you wish you'd known then?
I think like the biggest mistake we made was trying to start in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was just a really hostile market from a regulatory perspective, and we wasted more than a year, like a year and a half there. And like we also like hired a bunch of people that we had to let go because we couldn't operate there anymore.
If I remember correctly, that wasn't the only time you were surprised by how business was done in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, we had many surprises. Is there one that you're thinking of?
I'm thinking of when you were first starting in Kenya and like the banks would tell you yes to your face and then just not do something.
That's right. Yeah. So we had one of our earliest people we hired from our bank in Kenya. So he was working at a bank, and that bank was our partner, and was helping us get started for SendWave. The banks were basically lying to us about our status. They were trying to enable it for us, and at the same time they were trying to convince the Central Bank of Kenya to allow us to operate. And we didn't really know that there was a problem with the central bank or that anyone was asking any questions. Our bank was totally managing this relationship on our behalf without telling us anything. And especially if they were thinking of maybe not approving us, we would have wanted to be able to plan for that / lobby better. So it was a surprise to us when like we learned that we had a problem and that it had been solved by our bank. And a big reason why it was solved was that this guy who we ended up hiring was like going to bat for us really hard. He just like super strongly advocated for what we were doing, and he knew a lot of people, and he was just really, really good at his job. We definitely were surprised by how uncommunicative things were, and also were surprised by how much relationships matter. And I think both of those things served us well in terms of being able to predict what would happen as we grew to more countries.
It sounds like that hire from the Kenyan bank was incredibly clutch.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you left Wave recently. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Sure. Yeah, no. Nothing went wrong for me other than I just lost personal fit with the work. I think I'm very much an entrepreneur at heart, and I I like my Wave had gotten to 2,000 plus people. Like it was very, I wouldn't say bureaucratic. I do think like a lot of people like find Wave's culture to be very fast moving and agile, but like I guess it felt bureaucratic to me just because I was used to something even smaller and like way more agile as a tiny startup. And so by the time I left, it felt big and it felt slow moving in certain ways, and I like wasn't feeling a lot of resonance with it. I didn't have a very clear vision of like what to do next. I think in the early days of Wave, I was like, okay, we're going to build mobile money and we're going to scale it, and like we're going to go and do the merchants, right? We want to get businesses on it accepting Wave. And that part has gone great. Like we have businesses on it and accepting Wave, and we're scaling to multiple countries. And so for me, like the form of leadership that I wanted to do was vision setting and figuring out how to like make a product that touches a lot of people. And I did a lot of that. And like I didn't feel like I had that much more to contribute. I also kind of burned out on leadership and living in Africa. I lived in Africa for 3+ years, and like I didn't have to because of the remote working. Like by the time I left, I was basically full time in the U.S. But it felt like I was losing touch with like what actually needed doing by virtue of not living in Africa. So there were a whole lot of reasons. I think Wave is still a great company, and I definitely would encourage people who are motivated by this mission to consider whether there's anything at Wave that they would want to work on.
Are they hiring right now?
Yep. I don't know the latest, but the wave.com/careers will, I'm sure, have the latest.
And do you know what kind of thing you're looking for your next thing?
Well, something entrepreneurial, most likely. I'm interested in doing something other than global development just because I've been working on that for a while. I haven't figured out what yet. I've been trying to stay on top of emerging technology in the AI space, but like I also am not sure what I want to do, if I want to do something on AI. I've been really motivated by animal protection, animal welfare, animal rights, that kind of stuff recently. I am considering doing stuff in animals, but I haven't figured it out yet.
Those were all my questions. Is there anything else you want to add?
I would say like I'm really proud of what we've accomplished at Wave. I think like there was a recent study by the GSMA, which is the I don't remember what it stands for. You'll have to look it up. But it's this telephone company industry group that is sort of pro mobile money, right? And they came up with a study that showed that mobile money had been, it's similar to the one I mentioned earlier for Kenya, but it's for 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that mobile money has been a contributor to GDP growth in those countries, like a pretty substantial contributor, like single digit percentage points. And 2 of the countries they surveyed were Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, which is where Wave operates and is big. And so it makes me feel really excited and happy to hear that.
And this isn't statistical in any sense of the word, but I remember when I worked at Wave, at the time engineers would still occasionally take support calls, or a support call would turn into an engineering request, and we would get forwarded the user response. It'd be something like, "God bless you, I'm PP. This helped me get my father into the hospital where he needed to be." And it was just the most heartwarming job I ever had.
Yeah. We still do something like that. We call it support shadowing. It's funny. I say we. I no longer work at Wave, but I'm still using the term.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you to EA Infrastructure Fund and our Manafund donors for supporting this podcast. And have a great day.
Hey guys, you haven't heard my voice in a while since I wasn't on the last couple podcasts, but Elizabeth and I have finished the series that we were planning to do, and sadly we have no plans to do more, so I wanted to come back on to say goodbye and for a short wrap up.
Some obvious questions are what we learned from this. 1, I learned the Blue Yeti X microphone is too sensitive, and I apologize to everyone for that.
Nice. One thing I learned is that, well, this collaboration I think would have gone better if you had actually been in charge and the boss. Like, we considered having you be the CEO of this little project at the beginning and decided to co-lead it instead, but I think in retrospect it would have been better if you had been the final authority related to me not being on the last two podcasts, I have been in kind of a transition period of my life where I've been worse at making and holding commitments and better at exploring freedom and ideas. And I think that it helps to have someone, a clear, like, buck stops here person who's, tracking the needs of the project and making sure stuff gets done. And that wasn't a thing I was willing to do. So I think the way we could have noticed that you should have let it was by noticing that I didn't want to do those things, and that I was more happy to be, like, ordered around or told that I needed to do a thing than to be the one tracking what needed to be done.
Yeah. So I do want to point out that the fact that you were good at thinking of ideas is one reason we had the podcast and one reason I was excited to do it with you. So that trade-off is real. And the other thing I want to say for the benefit of anyone else thinking of doing the podcast is the issue isn't that the work didn't get done or I had to wait on Timothy to do the work. The issue was if I'd been CEO, I could have just given assignments and owned all the work. And by having nominal co-ownership, that created more work to make him feel included in, like, an equal decision maker while I was doing most of the work.
Work that I didn't ask you to make me feel equal, but yes. I should have realized that I didn't want to do that work and just asked you to lead it in the first place.
Well, thank you, and I hope people can learn from our example. We would just like to thank the EA Infrastructure Fund and all of our Mana Fund funders once again for your support. We couldn't have done it without you.
Yep. Thank you all so much, and thanks for following along. I believe, well, I'm not burned out on talking about EA stuff, so I remain open to talk about any of these topics. If you feel so called, please reach out.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.